This is a little late, so I'm going to be doing two, so I won't look any different in between the two videos I'm going to do for school. The readings for Disability, Politics, and Art, there's four. The first one is Freak Stages in Medical Theaters, which was an article in Disability and Contemporary Performance, Bodies on Edge, and it's by Petra Kuppers. Then Aesthetic Distance in the Fiction of Disability in Carrie Sandhell and Philip Auslander's Bodies in Commotion, Disability and Performance, it's Jim Ferris, and Seeing the Disabled, Visual Rhetorics of Disability in Popular Photography in Paul and Longmore and Lori Umansky's The New Disability History, American Perspectives, that's Rosemary Thompson. And then the finally last one is An Aesthetic of Disability in Susan Gable's Disability Studies and Education, Readings in Theory and Method, this still Susan Gable. So I have some notes. What was interesting, I guess, for me was, well, in this class we talk a lot about public policy and how arts are funded on a governmental scale, as opposed to a private scale, I guess because it's art and social movement, so a lot of times these movements are critiquing hegemony, which is sort of a governmental deal, right? Like, that's sort of what they produce. But on the other hand, the market isn't really capable of critiquing itself, or really having a moral position. So what are artists to do, right? And so funding's like a lot of what we talk about. So there was, I forgot, I still have to do the Native Art Interventions one, I think. I might have already recorded it and just not edited it yet, but I'll have a look at my computer. But there was this girl, or this woman, I'm trying to find her name, I think, no, sorry, it's this woman whose name I can't remember. I'll find it and put it somewhere you can find it. She was in the National Film Board, which in Canada funds like documentaries and just films, and it's publicly funded, and she's a native artist, and she does like video art and just like film type movies, and she got in there, I guess, in the 60s, like the late 60s, and she busted her ass for 30 years before getting the kind of funding structure that made any sense for like native movements. So that is why there's movies out about those communities and stuff like that. And so, but the same didn't really occur for disability, like getting the kind of funding, government funding, or public funding to support this kind of work of people who are in a minority, like culturally, I guess, or population-wise, not culturally. And so it's very difficult. So there was a lot about that. This sort of fiction of disability, sort of like, is disability real, or is it an enforced social construction that's forced upon the bodies of people? I think that's true. And what was interesting for me was the distance in all these readings, that people with disabilities find that people want to stay away from them. And one of the readings was about, it was about a performance that was put on by a bunch of people who had disabilities, physical, I think, disabilities. And that sort of theatrical distance between the stage and the audience, which was like an additional distance from the distance that people with disabilities find that is forced upon them by able-bodied people, allowed people maybe to listen to different ways of constructing or like handling in space their body with disabled bodies. So I thought that was really interesting. And kind of true, like, theater is a distancing thing, like, there's rules about how to handle all these things. So, it's sort of a constructed difference, I guess was the point. I'm just trying to look at my notes. And basically that article is about disabled people that can manage their own performances and identities to redefine the stare, because they get stared at, I guess, right? And present themselves as real people without being like, we're just like you, because they're not, right? Like, there's a difference there, and sort of minimizing that difference isn't really helpful in terms of constructing an identity or a critical discourse around how people interact with your body or have thoughts about your body, right? So I thought that was really interesting. and that closing that space also kind of puts a full stop to pity and like pitying behaviors of people who like, because it takes that space, like the distance between people is what allows pity to happen, and pity's really destructive and not really helpful at all, I think, and probably really disgusting to go through as a person. Like just because there's something different about you, to have people pity you is probably a fairly disgusting process to go through. So that space is what it's sort of like just it sort of like hops over a lot of bullshit just dealing with the space, you know what I mean? And I thought that was really interesting. And then when they were talking about, there's an article, Freak Stages in Medical Theaters, like the difference between like a freak show and a medical theater, and as somebody who's been like sick all her life and has been in teaching hospitals, and just like how you stop being a body and you are like a physical embodiment of whatever's wrong with you to be studied, how it was totally disempowering and you just sort of like shuffled along. And again, it was that distance, and this sort of, it was objectifying in a way, and then sort of relating that to freak shows, because freak shows, I guess, like, in one way are very offensive, right? It's just like, those people are different, let's go look at them and stare at them, but on the other hand, it's a little more complicated than that, because these people were totally embodied. They're like, this is my body, and I'm showing it to you, and you're paying to look at it, and I can talk to you, and I can be lewd and horrible or lovely and sweet, and it was a way for people to be who they were without apologizing, without that distance, without having to, it was like a world of their own, right? Like, so, I don't know, and they shut them all down, and there was this, like, retirement home in Florida that was for people who had been in freak shows or circuses or whatever, and that was shut down, and it just seems really sad that that happened, but that it could be really empowering for those people, is the point. And so this guy, all these readings were American readings, by the way, which I thought was interesting. Like, there wasn't another perspective, like different cultural perspectives on disability, but I guess it's such like a new discourse that we're still just getting a handle on it ourselves before we can really go and be like, how do people in Somalia deal with people with disabilities or whatever? Like, we have no idea. Or I have no idea. I'm sure people do, and, you know, I just don't know it, and it wasn't taught in this section. So it was sort of cathartic, basically, freak shows, and I thought that was interesting. I was always something was kind of like uncomfortable with, but it was interesting to me. And what came up in class too, which was really interesting, is that reality TV is kind of the new freak show, where people who are different than, like, because the space that's created isn't like a pitying space or dehumanizing space. The space is created like, whoo, I'm glad I don't have a beard, or I'm glad that I have long arms, or whatever it is, right? Or and now with reality TV and like talk shows, where people, like, it's usually a class thing too. It's usually these people who are poor and don't have like the access to things that people who aren't poor have access to, and so we're just sort of like laughing at them and getting our own catharsis from observing their suffering to a certain extent, like when they like fight on Jerry Springer, or they do like DNA tests on Montel Williams, or I don't really watch that stuff, so, like, I did, I guess, when I was younger, like, super younger, like, a long time ago, but, I just remember it just sort of seemed like, oh, I'm supposed to go to sleep now. That's not happening. But now it's like that. It's like, oh, I'm glad I'm not in that position. Oh, I'm glad I'm not, you know, a super overweight person, or I'm glad I don't look like a tree, you know, like those TLC things. And people were really upset with that tree guy, because he didn't want to get surgery. So that kind of stuff. So I thought that was interesting. It was really good. It was a really good section, and I'm not really doing it justice, but I only have 10 minutes, so that's why I thought about that, which was kind of Forrest Gump for me. Interesting.